Batman and Robin, the dynamic duo. One of, if not the most iconic duo in all of fiction, and certainly the most iconic duo in comics. Their relationship is obviously explored in many different iterations in animation, live action, and obviously in the comics. However, perhaps the most interesting iteration of this duo occurs in the DCAU. These two are inseparable. They are best friends, trusted. There's a reason they are called the dynamic duo. But what if I told you they actually had a dark backstory? What if I told you that they actually had something occur between them that would separate them forever? And that is what we're going to be talking about today, because today we're talking the downfall of the dynamic duo. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, downfall of the dynamic duo. Batman and Robin, no more. So, first, to understand this amazing relationship and understand the downfall that they would undergo, we have to understand the importance of their relationship, how it was built, and when the fractures started to occur. And then, obviously, the eventual straw that broke the camel's back. So, in Batman the Animated Series, they pick up with these two characters already partnered up. They're already both seasoned veterans. Robin is towards the tail end of his career as Robin. However, in Robin's Reckoning, Part 1 and 2, we do see the beginning. We see the events that occurred at Haley's Circus. We see Tony Zuko. And this is one of my favorite arcs in the entire DCAU. This story is very integral to the relationship between Batman and Robin. And I say that because in this storyline, we do get Dick Grayson going to live with Bruce. We get him finding out that Bruce Wayne is indeed Batman. We go through the struggle of Batman. Should he tell Dick I'm Batman? Or should I keep him in the dark? Should I keep him that isolated child? And ultimately, I believe that Alfred definitely played a big part in Bruce Wayne revealing to Dick Grayson that he was indeed Batman. This obviously led to them growing a lot closer, and the events with Tony Zuko definitely contributed. Dick Grayson interfered with Batman going to capture Tony Zuko because Dick Grayson obviously wanted revenge for what happened with his family. Things did not go well because by that point, Dick was only probably about 10 to 12 years old, so he was very young. He wasn't going to stand a chance against Tony Zuko, who was a fairly high up mob boss. He wasn't anything like a Carmine Falcone or Rupert Thorne, anything like that, but he still had some influence and still was pretty capable, especially when it compared to a literal child. So because of this and the interference with Dick, he ends up getting thrown into a big pool of water. Batman has to go save him, and Tony Zuko does escape. And we see Dick is distraught. He is destroyed by this. And he even says, "Why'd you do this? Why'd you let him get away? How could you do that?" And then that is when Batman reveals who he is. He takes him to the Batcave. He reveals that he is indeed Bruce Wayne. And this is a really pivotal point because Batman is not only trusting in someone other than Alfred, but he is seeing the pain that Dick has gone through. He's seeing himself in this child. And one of my favorite parts between this dynamic, and that is really shown well in this show and a couple other shows, is the fact that the entire reason that Batman indoctrinates Dick Grayson to become Robin, he makes him into a sidekick, he makes him into a symbol, is so that Dick does not grow up to be exactly like Bruce. He doesn't want him to be the next Batman. He knows the misery that comes along with wanting only vengeance, with holding on to all of that hatred. So, that being said, we do get a nice little training montage between the two of them, and then they do start their journey as Batman and Robin. Now, the other really important thing to note here is that in the second part of this, obviously we have them now back in present day because the beginnings were more of a flashback showing how we got to this point and how it all started. But now, Tony Zuko is back, and Robin learns of this. And instead of, hey, we're going to track him down together, we're going to do this as a team, Batman shuts him out. Batman casts him aside. And you can see how annoyed Robin is with this, and he even talks to Alfred and says, I can't believe he's shutting me out. After all this time, he knows how important Zuko is to me. He knows what this means to me. And this is really important for a couple couple of reasons, but to me, the most important thing to note here is this is the first time we really start to see fractures between this dynamic duo, because it is a really big thing about trust and broken trust. To Robin, Batman doesn't trust him enough to involve him with this. Batman doesn't care enough about him to involve him in something that means so much to him. Catching the man who murdered his parents. Bruce, of all people, should know what that meant to Dick. But instead, in Dick's mind, all he did was cast him aside and once again become the Batman, the one who puts the mission above everything else, including your supposed partner, the one who you are the dynamic duo with, you are the ultimate team with. And again, then we see Robin have to go out and figure out things on his own. And he says, I'm not a kid anymore. I know what I'm doing. I can find him on my own. I did it before when I was just a kid, and I'll do it now. And you can see Alfred is really disappointed in obviously everything that's going on, because he wants them to be closer. He doesn't want this rift to appear. And I think Alfred is the first one to really notice the fractures starting to appear. But that being said, the fractures don't last long, because Batman is wounded by Tony Zuko. There's an explosion that goes off, and Batman is pretty much a sitting duck. But then Robin swoops in, saves him, beats the shit out of Tony Zuko, and then has the opportunity to take him out, to take revenge, to seek vengeance that would be justified by this point, considering everything Tony Zuko has done and made Dick go through up until this point. And you can see Batman pleading with him and telling him not to do it. It's not worth it. So he doesn't. He stops, and they arrest him. They take him away forever. And then you get an interaction between Batman and Robin that is so important to not only the downfall of the dynamic duo, but also so important for both of their characters and the growth that they go through as characters. As I said before, it seemed like Batman regressed and went back into the lone detective who has to do this on his own, who pushes everyone away. But in this moment, he chooses to empathize with Robin. He chooses to let Robin know why he did what he did and his thought process through that. Whereas a Batman of maybe a few years earlier wouldn't have felt the need to do that. But he says to him, I'm really sorry. The only reason I didn't want to include you in this was because I remembered the pain that you went through at the hands of Tony Zuko. I knew what he took away from you all those years ago, and I didn't want him to take anything else from you. I didn't want him to take your life away from you, whether that's him doing something to you or you doing something to him that would end up costing you your future. And this is a really beautiful moment, and it really does get through to Robin, because they do walk off together, and any fractures that were there all but disappear, because Robin appreciates that Batman went through the process of explaining why he did what he did, and he understands why he did what he did. And it actually ends up, in my opinion, meaning a lot to Robin that Batman was willing to go through this much all by himself, just for the sake of Robin. However, on that same note, it never happens again, because I feel like they both grow from this moment, and they both acknowledge that just because something may be difficult for one of us, just because we want to save the other from pain, doesn't mean we can exclude one another. We have to remain in the loop, especially on things that are this big and this important. And then we don't see any fractures. Everything seems to be really good. From the missions against Ra's al Ghul, to taking down the Joker, to fighting against the Riddler. There are no fractures shown at all through the rest of the animated series and the Sub-Zero movie. Nothing at all. But then we get to the New Adventures of Batman, and something really interesting happens. We have Batgirl, and we have Robin. However, it's not Dick Grayson. It is revealed in the second episode that this is Tim Drake. You get the backstory. You get him getting indoctrinated as the new Robin. But then something really, really interesting happens. And it's a little weird because some of these episodes were released out of order. So, in chronological order, just based on what makes sense canon-wise, Old Wounds would be one of the very next episodes to make sense. Now, Old Wounds is a very, very important episode for a multitude of reasons. The biggest reason being, we see why Dick Grayson and Bruce parted ways. And it's pretty tragic, and in my opinion, one of the worst things Batman has ever done, especially in this universe. It starts out, and we have the new Robin going against some low-level thugs, and we then see Nightwing appear. He picks picks up a wallet and he says, oh wow, this is interesting. It ends up being a security guard they had stopped years prior when he was still Robin at the side of Batman. Now, before all this occurs, and we do get a rooftop scene between Nightwing and Robin, where Robin asks him, why don't you come around anymore? You were Batman and Robin, the dynamic duo, the best team. How could you guys just throw that away? And Nightwing's telling him, like, hey kid, you don't know what happened. You really are underestimating how bad things got and how bad things could get. So Tim Drake does what he does and he pressures him. He wants to know, well, what happened? What could have been so bad to push you guys so far apart? And then we get the reveal. Dick Grayson was in college. He was graduating. Everyone's there for him. Barbara, Alfred, obviously not his parents. And then we see the empty seat. Bruce didn't go because he was being Batman. He was foiling a robbery. Now, was this enough to push him over the edge? No, it wasn't. But it gets much, much worse. We then go a little bit later and we have Barbara on a date with Dick. They're out at dinner probably a few days later, maybe even that same night. And then Dick Grayson gets a phone call. And who is it? It's Bruce. Is it him congratulating Dick, saying, great job, you graduated with the highest honors. I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. No, it's him saying, hey, I need you now. Suit up. Nothing at all regarding Bruce missing one of the biggest moments in Dick Grayson's life. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just a simple, I need you here now. Get here. And then on top of being forced to lie to Barbara Gordon, the person he's in love with, the person he's dating, as soon as he arrives to help Batman, he says, you're late. Again, no acknowledgement for the inconvenience that he put him through. No acknowledgement of him missing a significant moment in Dick Grayson's life. Dick doesn't have any parents. He didn't have anyone to be there as a parental figure aside from Alfred. And Bruce seemed to not care at all. And that's where the fractures start to become even more than fractures. We then see them thwart a plan by the Joker, or almost thwart, before they are knocked under some debris. But luckily for them, one of the people did not get away. He was a little bit too slow, got left behind, so they track him down and start interrogating him. However, this is where some more fractures do appear. And you might say, well, why? He's just a low-level thug. And you're right, he is. But he was also in front of his wife and child. His little 5-year-old was standing right there as his father was getting interrogated by the Batman in a pretty brutal and threatening way. And Robin says to him, Batman, we can't do this. Not in front of his kid. And Batman coldly looks at him and says, he'll be rid of me once he tells me what I need to know. And he continues. And Robin says, I've had enough of this, and leaves. And Batman soon follows. And as I said before, this is when the fractures start to become much more than just fractures. This relationship is really, really deteriorating. Now we go a little bit further because not much comes of what just happened. They don't really discuss it all that much. They disagree, and that's that. However, then we see Barbara Gordon going to talk to Bruce Wayne and saying how upset Dick was with Bruce. But again, it's important that he did not vocalize this to Bruce. He was just venting to his girlfriend, Barbara. And she says, hey, this isn't the first time this has happened. He starts flipping out, freaking out, talking about all these things. But then when I ask him more about it, he can't tell me. So this is when Bruce does something really interesting. He takes her to the Batcave and reveals that he indeed is Batman and Dick Grayson is Robin. Then as this is going on, the Joker starts to attack some building. So Batman and Batgirl suit up and leave. Then after that, Dick Grayson returns home, asks Alfred where they went. Alfred says, oh, they went to run an errand. Batmobile's gone, so is the Batsuit. So deep down, Dick knows something is definitely up. So fast forward a little bit through the episode, and we get to the moment where they defeat the Joker. He is completely out of it, and we get that rooftop scene between Batman, Batgirl, and Robin, where Robin is saying, I can't believe you never told me, and Batgirl, rightfully so, says, well, you never told me. And again, that was a bit of a standoff, and it could have ended there. But then Dick said something really important, but you told him. And then Barbara looks at him and says, he already knew. And the look on Dick's face when this is said, and the amount of betrayal he had to feel in this moment is almost insurmountable. He knew, Batman knew, that Robin's girlfriend was indeed Batgirl. was putting her life on the line, was at times fighting alongside them, and he felt no need to share this with him. All those fractures that were there, they're not there anymore. That relationship by this point is completely shattered and over with. It is even worse than what happened with Tony Zuko. Him being cast aside, he couldn't be trusted. And we get that line of dialogue that Batman uses people. You think that you're choosing to do this, but he forces you to do it. You don't know him like I do. And then Batman tries to talk to him, and you get Dick Grayson just punches him right in the face, takes off his mask, his cape, throws it down. And before this happens, and why I think this really did, and why in my opinion this was pretty justified, Batman had the audacity to look at Robin and say, "It wasn't my place to tell you." That is absolutely absurd. They are partners. That should have been something that was shared with Robin. I love Batman, especially this version of Batman, but to me, that is absolutely unforgivable. However, that's not the worst of it. In Batman Beyond, we have something else revealed. Barbara ended up leaving Dick Grayson for Bruce. Robin asked her to go with him to Bloodhaven, and she didn't go. Instead, she stayed with Bruce. But what if I told you it got even darker than that? You see, there are a couple tie-in comics. Batman Beyond 2.0, issue 28 and 29. Things get way, way darker. And by that, I mean Barbara is revealed to be pregnant. And this happens when she is with Dick and with Bruce. And this gets revealed to Dick Grayson that she's pregnant. She doesn't fully know who the child is. She thinks it's Dick's, but she's with Bruce. And Dick still doesn't fully know that she is indeed with Bruce. They end up having an altercation. They don't find out who the baby is. Dick Grayson ends up on top of Bruce Wayne, fighting him over and over again. And while this is happening, Barbara tries to stop some thugs and ends up lying on the ground, writhing in pain. Months later, she ends up miscarrying. Nothing is ever said again between the three of them together. They leave it at that. Nightwing leaves, doesn't talk to them ever again. And that is how the downfall of the dynamic duo occurred. Truly tragic for a once great duo, a once great unstoppable team, and best friends. Truly one of the saddest things for me that ever happened in the DCAU. But what do all of you think? Which do you think was the worst thing that Batman ever did in the DCAU? Do you think any of what he did to Dick Grayson was justified? Should he have just told Robin that Batgirl was indeed Barbara Gordon? Let me know in the comments down below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.